All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Most podcast. Taping this on a Thursday evening. Jon Tayler of Fangraphs.com is here. Not as he is every Thursday, because we rarely record on a Thursday evening, but we're switching things up a little bit this week.
Well, it's still a day that begins with a T and ends with a Y, so we're keeping it steady there.
That is true. That is true. I didn't even think about that. Jon Tayler, good evening, sir. How are you, my friend?
I am doing all right. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. The weather can't decide. It has both rained extremely hard and been extremely sunny multiple times today, so don't really know what's going on there. But no engagement photos this evening, but I think those will still come in the next couple days. I don't know. I'm not a natural. I'm very concerned about this, John, and I don't know if you're like this, but there are like people who can like smile for any kind of photos, and you can tell that they're the very jovial, flashing the pearly whites, like just born to smile. That's not my deal.
That's not me either. I know what you mean. Where if you ask me to smile on command for something, you're going to get something that looks like I am being assaulted in the process.
Yes, that's me.
Where it's like I do a smile and it's like that's not a smile, and it's like, well, what do you want here, man? What do you want here?
But if you make me genuinely laugh, you'll get a real great smile from me. Like I don't just throw out the smile for anyone. I can't force a smile. I've tried. It just doesn't work for me. That is not my deal.
I'm in the same boat. I'm the same way where it's like it's got to be genuine, and just having to do it immediately for a photo and just be like, it just doesn't work for me.
No, but something tells me the Sports Renaissance woman will have some effect on how my smileage goes on this engagement photo shoot. John, did you know that you're in the top 3 for my dad's favorite podcast guests each week?
Wow. Who are the other 2?
Matt Green for the college football show. Okay. Big no surprise there. Dad's number 1 is college football, and then Will for college basketball. So that's why Will.
Dang,
so y'all are in the big 3.
Yeah, and I got the baseball on lock then. Nice.
You do have the baseball on lock, and he's like, yeah, he's a smart guy. He'll tell me so. He's gonna listen to this and be like, oh, he got another shout out. But he's like, John's a smart guy. I always learn something. When
appreciate that. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to educate and inspire.
Exactly. Well, John, we have some baseball to talk about on this very podcast, sir.
Yes.
We're not gonna go down the Red Sox rabbit hole to start things off. We'll hit the Red Sox in a second.
I don't really know what there is to say. It's a team with no depth and too many injuries. Like there is a lot, I think, to be figured out, and this is probably maybe a better discussion even for the off season when we start looking at teams in review. But like I think for the Red Sox, the big question now is like they're not going to make the playoffs at this point. I mean they're behind the Orioles in the standings. Like the playoffs are a distant memory at this point. I think the question becomes, is this roster actually good at this point? Or is it a roster that's good in very narrow, specific circumstances where, and I think it reminds me a lot of, I think the Red Sox remind me a fair amount of the Giants at this point, where it just feels like when things go right, it has the potential to be a really, really strong team. When things are not going right, and not even so much when things go wrong, but when things are just not right, things go bad in a real big hurry because the depth is not there, and the major league signings that have been made have been not enough. So yeah, I don't. That's kind of the thing with the Red Sox. So I mean, I just don't know what more there is to say about them at this point. In part because, and I think this is something we mentioned during the deadline recap, like it's kind of hard to tell exactly what direction they're going at this point. It doesn't really feel like there's anything is being built to other than kind of generic mid contention. But like you said, that's a whole mess that is, we don't have to touch on that no more.
Well, we should, just because we're here. The Chris Sale injury timeline in Boston is pretty preposterous, right? That is just the looming part of all of this. It's just, you feel terrible. Like this whole season has just been defined by the injury, but also just losing his shit in a start where he
in
gets
on that
only
rehab start. Yeah,
yeah. I don't know. Like, I just feel terrible for that guy. Like, Chris Sale has just got the
yeah,
worst injury luck known to man, right? Like, what do you even say about
yeah.
Chris Sale at this point?
I don't know because like on the one hand, there's a genuine question of like, can his body hold up to the act of pitching? You know, between Tommy John surgery and the issues he's had with his arm since that got him off to a late start this season. I think there's a genuine question as to like, what can the Red Sox realistically expect from this guy in terms of the innings he can provide before his body breaks. On the other hand, the last two injuries he suffered, both the broken finger that knocked him out for that was probably going to knock him out for the rest of the season, that was on a comebacker, and the broken wrist he suffered in a bike accident. I mean, that's not his fault. That's not something
Yeah.
where you can be upset, I think, or concerned about the idea that Chris Sale is being paid a lot of money and has just not been available. He's just not pitched basically the last 2 years. And that's a real problem. That has been a huge problem for the Red Sox. It's an injury. I think in the same way that Steven Strasburg's injuries have kind of like undid a significant chunk of the Nationals in terms of both their ability to plan and their ability to plan financially. But the last two are just sheer dumb, stupid luck,
Mm.
and it sucks. It's really terrible because I mean the guy is very much he has several screws loose in his head, but he's a great pitcher when he's out there and when he's healthy. I just worry now at this point that even, health aside, like he has missed so much time. I just don't know how you can count on him for anything at this point going forward. And that's a real problem for the Red Sox. Like a good Red Sox team next year, a good version of the 2023 Red Sox involves as much healthy Chris Sale as they can get. And it's an open question at this point as to whether or not that's going to happen because, do I think he's going to break another finger on another comebacker? I mean, there's no way to predict that. Do I worry that when he comes into spring training and tries to ramp up or whatever, that he's going to experience some arm trouble or arm pain? Yeah, because he's barely pitched the last 2 years. And when he has pitched, he has hurt his arm really, really quickly in every scenario. So that I mean, like I said, it's a really big concern for the Red Sox. It is a huge concern, especially because their rotation next year, they're losing Nate Eovaldi, who is going to be a free agent, who is also pitching with lowered velocity and worse results since coming back from the injured list about 3 or so weeks ago. Um, they don't really have much beyond that. Nick Pivetta had a very strong first couple months and then turned back into Nick Pivetta. The rookies that they've used for spot starts here and there have been fine, but nothing special. The veterans they added in Michael Wacha and Rich Hill have both missed a lot of time and also are not really guys I think you can count on going forward. Hill in particular, unfortunately, as much as I love Rich Hill, really does look like he has reached the end of the road. The free agent pitching market obviously has some options, but I don't really see the Red Sox
Khaleesi's out.
being.
Mm-hmm.
she's back up. I don't really see them being players for big free agent contracts at this point. This team has made a big habit of staying away from them. Plus, they have to try to figure out what an extension for Rafael Devers looks like, which is their most pressing long-term concern. I don't expect Xander Bogaerts to return. He's 100% going to opt out, and I don't think the team has any interest in retaining him at this point.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a really bad situation. If nothing else, forget whether or not this team with Sale was a playoff team. They needed to try to get some better sense of what is Chris Sale capable of producing at this point. And in 2022, that amounted to about 6 innings. That's really nothing to go on.
Well, I think I have the
And
official stat here from Jeff Passan. He has thrown 5.2 innings this season, and he threw 42.2 in 2021. So he has 47 innings in 2 years. That's
yeah,
just brutal.
it's brutal. And not only that, but those innings in 2021 were coming off Tommy John surgery, so they were terrible, or at least not up to his usual standard. And he looked better in the single start he was actually fully able to make against Tampa when he came off the injured list back in July, I think. But by this point, you don't know what you're going to get from Chris Sale at this point going forward. And
Right.
I especially feel like you can't rely on. I don't think you should expect anything from Chris Sale going forward. I think you should act as if whatever he gives you is a pure bonus and build around his absence. Not build with the plan of, oh, we're going to get 180 great innings from Chris. You cannot. You'd have to be insane to expect that at this point. You
Mm.
know, I think maybe you can say we can pencil Chris Sale in for 50 to 100 innings, barring some weird fluke injury again. And, well, everything after that is gravy. But again, and this is, like, again, I'm sure this will come up for the Red Sox offseason stuff. With a rotation that thin and lacking internal depth beyond, a handful of rookies we've seen who are, again, nothing particularly special from them, you can't just pencil him into the rotation for 2023, to be like, okay, we figured out it, we have another rotation. No. You have to act as if he's not going to be there next year. Because you don't know who he is at this point.
Yeah.
You got 5 innings this year, just shy of 6, to see what kind of pitcher he now is. That's it. And we're not going to get to see that again until he either throws in the offseason or until he throws in spring training, assuming he doesn't get hurt again between now and then, which is the other part of this. Like, again, the most recent injuries that happened to him are not his fault. Comebackers happen, accidents happen. That's not a slight on him or to suggest that, that's the kind of thing we should expect. But he is an injury-prone player whose arm has simply not proven capable the last few years of holding up.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I don't think you can, if you're the Red Sox, I don't think you can go into next season expecting really anything at all out of him. And you have to plan as if you're going to get nothing out of him. And that whatever he produces is a bonus. It's not a baseline, it's a bonus. And with that in mind, I will be very interested to see how the Red Sox approach this offseason, because the other part of it is there are a lot of holes on this team.
Mm-hmm.
And the farm system is not ready to fill them yet. So they are still going to have to do some work in free agency and ideally in trades, and maybe start leveraging off some of the they have some depth in that farm system, but maybe start leveraging off some of those non-star pieces or some of those, teenage lottery tickets down in A-ball or in the complex, and start seeing if you can't turn those players into useful, productive major leaguers. Because there also really does seem to be a shortage of those just available to the Red Sox. I mean, they started the season with Christian Arroyo as their 4th outfielder. He's not an outfielder. They started the year with Jackie Bradley Jr. as a starting right fielder. That was a horrible mistake that they paid dearly for before finally releasing JBJ the other week. They started the season with Bobby Dahlbeck at first base because they simply did not decide to find another option there. And I could get, like, next year, I assume if Bogarts walks, Trevor Story will be the shortstop. So who's at second base? It shouldn't be Jeter Downs. He struck out in over a third of his plate appearances up with Boston this season. And he's been terrible in AAA the last 2 years. The pieces are still missing for this to be a contending functional team. And I think that's what's so frustrating about stuff like the Mookie Betts trade or the upcoming or Bogarts walking this offseason or any potential Rafael Devers trade is that those, like, you're not getting better when that happens. Your team is not getting better when you trade Mookie Betts. Your team is not getting better when you let Xander Bogaerts walk. Your team is not getting better when you trade Rafael Devers. Maybe some potential future team is getting better if you trade Rafael Devers, or at least has the opportunity to be good. But this team is already in such a weird place, I think, roster-wise and contention-wise, that I don't really know how you can make the argument to subtract major league roster talent when there are already so many holes. And I guess that's the thing. Like, if you're in this place where you have these holes, you can either fill them, or you can start subtracting expensive pieces again and trying to build things on the fly. And, like, we have this entire season proves pretty well that strategy really only works with good health. When your team runs into bad health, and I think you've seen this too in Tampa, how they just really have not been able to get how the Rays have just kind of never really been able to get in a particular groove, have never really challenged either for the AL East or for any of the top wildcard spots, except for some stretches in there. You need really good health to make a team that doesn't have stars work. If your building model is something like Tampa, whereas we're not signing
or Chicago right now.
Or Chicago right now. If you're not trading for if you're not signing for or trading for established stars, spending the money to do that, and instead you're relying on a collection of internally developed players from your farm system, mid-tier to lower tier free agents, reclamation projects, waiver signings, minor league free agents, stuff like that. The way Tampa builds the majority of their roster, that can work, but you have to have a really, really good player development team. you have to ace your free agent signings. You have to find the guys who actually offer some upside. And which is another thing with me for the Red Sox is Chaim Bloom really seems to love dumpster diving. Guys like Juris Familia, Eric Hosmer, Tommy Pham, Jackie Bradley Jr., like these are not guys with any real upside left, nor do
He
I think they're
doesn't.
guys.
Has he shaken off the fact that he is just the GM of the Boston Red Sox now, where it's like
This is part of it. Like the way that this works, this is something actually I found was kind of the case with Andrew Friedman early on in his Dodgers tenure. You got that sense that he wasn't really either willing or able to spend money in the way that the Los Angeles Dodgers should have been. And he was still trying to build in this kind of Tampa fashion. And it's like, that's fine. But again, the way to make that work consistently is to have money so that when you run into these issues where you're like, hey, like for all of our work, we haven't really figured out, for example, a long-term solution to catcher. Let's go sign Wilson Contreras this offseason. And that'll buy us 3 more years to try to figure that out. And the Red Sox are in that position too. They don't have a catcher in their system right now. They don't really have options catching wise for next year. They wouldn't have really because Christian Vasquez was a free agent at the end of the year anyway. But there is a scenario for you. It's like there are 2 ways you could go about fixing that. The Dodgers way is just being like, hey, let's just go get Wilson Contreras. He's the best available player. We can sign him to a short-term big AAV deal, and in the interim, we'll try to figure out some more long-term sustainable solution. Or, as Chaim Bloom has done a lot, you could be like, well, we'll just do Kevin Plawecki and Reese McGuire and Connor Wong and a bunch of other garbage next season. And hopefully we'll figure something out in the time being, but otherwise, maybe these guys will work. They don't. You're guaranteeing yourself a really low ceiling and a pretty low floor, too, when you do stuff like that. And again, especially once you start running into injury problems, because, I mean, look, like no Red Sox season with an injured Trevor Story and an injured Chris Sale and an injured, all with the various injuries they solved, it was going to be a hard path anyway. But you make it that much harder when you don't have stars around them and when you don't invest in the best available players.
Do you feel better about the Mookie Betts trade now or worse?
No, worse, far worse. Particularly because Alex Verdugo looks like a league average outfielder right now at best. Jeter Downs has gone backwards as a prospect. Connor Wong looks like maybe a backup catcher. And that's really it. That's all they got out of that deal. And some salary, and some payroll flexibility by moving David Price. In exchange, they gave up an MVP who's having another MVP caliber season in Los Angeles. I get that trade was not about the return. It was about getting rid of Price's contract and about or at least with the understanding that Mookie Betts is not going to sign long term for the price that the Red Sox wanted. So they might as well get something for him before he walks. And to me, it's like when you operate a team that way, when you're basically saying like, look, we cannot afford to spend a penny more above this. We will not sign guys to contracts unless they are exactly the contracts we want. This is the situation you end up in.
But is that an
where you end up trading
thing
a dollar?
or a Bloom
Where you traded. I think it's an ownership thing, and I think it's also a Bloom thing because I think they found a guy to build a team the way they want it to be built, which is to say on the cheap. And
That's
I think
so
part
strange.
of that is well, I think the ideal was turn the Red Sox into Tampa, turn the Red Sox into the Rays in terms of the player development, in terms of the farm system, in terms of the ability to get the most out of minor league and major league free agents, especially guys who've been overlooked or or cast off. But that is such a hard strategy to execute well, and you need luck too. You need good injury luck. You need breakouts. You need established baselines of performance from guys where you need flexibility roster wise so that you don't have to do stuff like play your backup infielder as your fourth outfielder. You need to be able to make that work. And this team, this roster right now just doesn't really make any sense. It's not flexible. It's not deep. It doesn't have, there are a lot of problems with this team right now. And I'm not really sure what the solution is at this point, because if ownership doesn't want to spend the money necessary to bring in marquee free agents to, raise the floor on this roster, then I don't really see why you would expect anything more than like an 80 to 85 win team next year. There are a lot of holes here, and they're not really a lot of visible available solutions that don't cost money or prospects.
Whew. I'm looking for where y'all are at right now in the farm system rankings for your 19. So you got
Yeah, and
Marcelo, Meyer coming up.
that's the thing. Like those like Boston was, I think, bottom 5 in Fangraphs farm system rankings before Bloom took over. It has been a slow climb just to get to 19. Some of that, and that's with the luck, for example, of having Meyer fall into their laps in the 2021 draft.
Yeah.
You know that he
But
went
he's still
that he
not going to
didn't
be
go
up for a
number 1 or
while,
2.
right?
No, like I don't. He just got bumped up to, I believe, high A. You're
Mm.
talking about someone where the best case scenario is he tears double A up next year if he starts next year at double A, and maybe you're talking about toward the end of the season bringing him up or something. Realistically, I don't think you should expect to see him before 2024. And
Mm.
that's if everything goes right from here on out. Tristan Casas, something similar, where I guarantee that he's going to be part of the first base battle or whatever it will be this offseason. But he's lost the great majority of the season to an ankle injury. There's no guarantee that when he comes up, he's going to produce. So, yeah, I mean, that's it. Again, like a lot of this is just like, if you're going to rely on that farm system, then you have to be you have to be able to fill the other space, because like a farm system can't do it all. You have to be willing to spend money in the places where the farm system can't help you right now. And if you're not going to do that, and instead you're just going to sign cheap free agents and be like, well, just patch something together, you're not a serious contender at that point. You're just aiming for like the mid 80s and wins, and maybe trying to sneak in through a wild card. But what's the point of that ultimately if you're the Red Sox? I think there's a point to that if you're like the Pirates, because part of the point is like giving your fans something to care about, something to watch. Look like the Orioles right now. But if you're the Red Sox, you should be aiming much higher than maybe we win 84 games and we're the second wild card.
Yeah.
The AL East is not an easy division by any stretch of the imagination, but it's still like they won it last year with a more or less the same cast. It is within reach if you put together the right roster. You just have to be willing to try. And I think that's my biggest concern about the Red Sox right now, is we have not seen over the last 3 seasons now that willingness to try to add talent as opposed to subtracting it for financial reasons, and adding it in the case of Story, who was signed in part because he's a good player and he filled a hole at second base, but also because he was very clearly the person who was going to replace Bogaerts at shortstop when Bogaerts walked. He was the already existing fallback plan, and that's no way to build a team necessarily. Having fallback plans is good, but having fallback plans where you've already decided that your all-star shortstop is just someone you're not interested in retaining their services any longer, I don't know. You're just shifting deck chairs on the Titanic at that point. You're just shuffling pieces. You're not building anything. You're just kind of maintaining a pretty mediocre status quo.
Go Red Sox.
Yeah, it's great times in Boston right now with the Red Sox, and
They
especially
might just be forced into a full-on rebuild. Like, this might just be a situation where you look at the landscape of the AL East right now, and you're like, all right, we're behind Baltimore at this point. Baltimore's got the best farm
but
system in
that's
baseball. They're
I
coming.
don't. But even if you're a Red Sox team and you're thinking, okay, rebuild, there's not really a whole lot to use in terms of getting to that rebuild. Devers is your
Yeah.
best piece there, but Rafael Devers is 25, 26 years old. That is the
Mhm.
kind of guy you build around. That's not a piece you trade in a rebuild. Like, unless you're the Nationals and you're just, one, don't know what you're doing, and two, are just trying to cut as much money off the books for new ownership, there's no sensible baseball reason to trade Rafael Devers. And
Yeah.
beyond that, there's really nothing on this roster at the moment that I would think would bring you anything of any value in a rebuild. Guys like Alex Verdugo, or Kike Hernandez, or Story. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to want to trade for Trevor Story. There are not really pieces on
That's
this
bleak.
roster
We're already
where.
at the trade Trevor Story part of
But
the
but that's the
acquisition.
thing. Like, if the Red Sox, if Hein Bloom and Red Sox management does have in mind that it's like, okay, maybe we just need to tear this down and start over, there's not a whole lot for you to tear down at this point. You might as well just build, honestly, because you're not going to get anything really of value except for Devers. and Devers is the kind of guy you should build around in the first place. You know, I can with Bogarts, I can at least understand the idea that he's hitting his 30s. He's never been a great defensive shortstop. Um, it's a hard argument to make. I would just give Xander Bogaerts the money he wants, and that's the end of that conversation. But I can at least understand that there are some valid baseball reasons why you might think twice about extending him. With Devers, come the hell on. There's no argument there. The only argument is he's not a great defensive first baseman. So what? There's this thing called the designated hitter, where you can just park a really good hitter if you don't like their defense anymore. The Red Sox had that for a really long time in a Hall of Fame caliber hitter in David Ortiz. I'm not saying Rafael Devers is David Ortiz, but he's a very, very talented hitter who has shown no signs of, if anything, he's only shown signs of getting better and improving as a hitter because he's still young and he's still in his prime. That's the kind of guy you build around. That's not the kind of guy you trade just to, like, especially because that trade is going to end up being 3/4 for $1, the same way it was for Mookie Betts. I don't really see any reason why that trade would look any different ultimately.
Can Greg pitch the rest of the season as Chris Sale for the Red Sox? Greg from Succession?
Yes. I think that I would like, if they ever do make a baseball movie about our current times, yes, Nicholas Braun should definitely play Chris Sale.
Right? Like, he's the most Chris Sale looking guy imaginable.
I like it.
And happier news for Red Sox Nation. They can live the rest of the, hopefully for them, they're like, oh, Yankees troubles? Like, what's going on here? We might be dying. This season might be a lost cause for us. But the Yankees have been rough the last few weeks. John, what is going on with the Yankees?
Part of it is just they only have 3 or 4 regulars really hitting right now. They have Aaron Judge, who's the best hitter on the planet at the moment. DJ LeMahieu's been great, and Anthony Rizzo's been productive, and Jose Trevino somewhat, but that's really it. And so the bottom half of their lineup has not really produced. Their bench has not really produced. You know, I think they're missing. Bad. Yeah, that's the thing. Like with the Yankees, especially, is they don't have a good bench.
Mm-hmm. Carpenter's now gone for a long time.
Losing Matt Carpenter really, really hurts. They really, obviously, his left-handed bat and all the power he provided, and his versatility in terms of he could play first, he could still maybe play a little third, he can DH. I don't know if they managed to get him in the outfield at all, but either way, there was some versatility there that he was offering that is no longer there. And obviously, coupled with Aaron Hicks and Gleyber Torres and Josh Donaldson, well, I mean, I'd say slumping, but Donaldson's been in a season-long slump. I mean, I think they'll be okay ultimately. They have some issues that they're struggling with in terms of slumps right now. They've really struggled in high leverage situations since the All-Star break. Part of that, I think, is Clay Holmes struggling in the 9th inning. He's had some really bad blowups or meltdowns in the last week or so. But it really is just they have a lineup that's really only a third of it is hitting right now. And some of that I think should improve. I think Gleyber Torres should probably hit better. They will probably get better. Like they will get Giancarlo Stanton back at some point, and that will help matters as well. But I don't also at the same time expect any real reason to think that Isaiah Kiner-Falefa or Aaron Hicks or Josh Donaldson are really going to give you anything more than they've given you at this point. You know, that's 2 old guys in Hicks and Donaldson where injuries have really, really just, I think, sapped what's left in their bodies and bats, and a guy in Kiner-Falefa who just has never hit first place, you know, and has also not looked particularly good as a shortstop defensively. So I would be curious to see ultimately if the Yankees pull a Braves as they did with Michael Harris and Vaughn Grissom and decide that maybe now is the time for Anthony Volpe or for Oswald Peraza. Like if they do want that little shot in the arm, if they think, you know, maybe they are better off with Falefa on the bench for the time being. Or
Dominguez might get a call up too. Who knows?
But yeah, I mean, they're just struggling right now, just in terms of getting reliable, consistent at bats from guys who are not named Aaron Judge and DJ LeMahieu and Anthony Rizzo. So some of that should turn around, I think. But I think if you're a Yankees fan, like, you know, they're still going to win the division. I don't think there's any real chance that they blow that unless Toronto goes absolutely buck wild over the last 6 weeks of the season. But I mean, if you're the Yankees, like, how good do you feel about your offense in the postseason now? Or how good do you feel about the bullpen that has really kind of up and down a fair amount? How good do you feel about the non-Garrett Cole parts of the rotation? Like, I don't think Frankie Montas, he had a tough start in his first start as a Yankee. I don't think that's what we should expect necessarily, unless something about his shoulder is still bothering him, which that's has to be a wait-and-see kind of thing. But, Jameson Taillon has been really up and down. Dominguez is not an assistant pitcher. Nestor Cortez really seems at this point, I love Cortez. I love what he's done. He really starts to feel more like a five and fly guy at this point. And
Yeah.
granted, in the postseason, means he's really only going to see the lineup twice, maybe start a third time. But yeah, there are, I think, some real legitimate depth issues with the Yankees that
The Jordan Montgomery trade, I think we can almost say now was a mistake. Like, that was one that felt like a mistake at the time.
I can understand the logic of it in that if you think that Montgomery is not a guy who's going to make your playoff rotation, if you've decided that your playoff rotation, once they got Montas, is Cole, Montas, Cortez, and Taillon, and you think that
or Severino if he's healthy,
or Severino if he's healthy. I mean, and that's another big one that they're waiting to come back to see how Luis Severino is going to pitch. Then really for Montgomery, you're looking at a bullpen role at best, and as a ground ball oriented lefty who doesn't throw particularly hard, there's not really, you can't really play matchups with him. There's not really, you're not going to turn to a starter to do bulk innings in the postseason. Like, he doesn't really have a role playoff roster. And the difference between him and Herman, for example, over the course of the rest of the season probably amounts to nothing in terms of projected production. Meanwhile, Harrison Bader is a fantastic defensive center fielder, and Hicks out of the lineup on a regular basis, and allow the Yankees to play Aaron Judge and right on a regular basis instead of having to make him play center every now and again. Offensively, I don't know that he adds all that much aside from some cheap power and some speed, but I think what he offers defensively and the ability to firm up the Yankees defense in the outfield for the postseason, and what he offers on the base pass too, I think that's worth the minor downgrade from Montgomery to Herman. But I mean, yeah, it was a risky deal for sure. There's a chance that does not work out as planned, particularly that Bader's been dealing with in plantar fasciitis is not something that just goes away easily or quickly necessarily. It already has had complications for him. He's already out longer than the Cardinals had originally expected him to be. So it definitely is a gamble. But I think that's the thing. I don't think the Yankees necessarily had to do more at the deadline. It just does seem though like this is also, I think, kind of the bet they made in off season that instead of going like a Carlos Correa or a Seager, that they were going to take the diminished offense at short from a guy like Henry Falefa and or diminished offense from Donaldson at third base in exchange for the better defense those guys provide. I think Bader is something similar, where the focus is really on run prevention. That between Judge and Stanton and Rizzo and LeMahieu and whoever else gets hot at the moment, they can hack their way enough through postseason games against postseason pitching, but that really the better defense is the one that will make a bigger difference overall in keeping runs off the board in a way that they really couldn't last season. So I can understand that trade. I think it's still risky, obviously, but it does, when you look at it that way, I think make a fair amount of sense.
Should be interesting. I also think, Brantley on the shelf for a while, and it doesn't seem good what's going on in Houston there. And they have some outfield issues. They're not perfect. Like, the AL is not like where the Yankees are in serious trouble. Like, everybody who's contending in the AL, I think, has their flaws right now.
I think that's fair. I think, it's your, I think it's personal choice at this point if you like the Astros or the Yankees more in terms of which is the better team in the American League. But I don't think the gap between them, if there is a gap, is at all sizable. Like, I think they're two equally matched teams, where if that is the pennant series we get, like, I think either of those would be deserving and valid AL winners. And I do think that between the two of them, they have a claim to one of them being the best team in the American League. Which, granted, the only other real options are Minnesota and Toronto and maybe Cleveland, though I guess by virtue of Cleveland being tied with the Twins or ahead. I can't remember actually if they're tied or ahead of the Twins down the Central, but I guess that's the other thing. The gap, there's no real gap between the Yankees and the Astros. There is a gap between the Yankees and the Astros and the rest of the American League. And I think that's part of the calculus too for the Yankees, is that we're guaranteed a playoff spot at this point. We, on paper, are one of the better, if not the best team in the American League. We upgraded the rotation at the deadline. We added Andrew Benintendi, someone we actually haven't mentioned yet, who's struggled so far as a Yankee, but certainly has shown better than that, or played better than that in Kansas City. They made the changes that they felt they needed to make, and they put themselves in position to, I think, at the very least, get to the ALCS and figure it out from there. And I think that really, when it comes to building a playoff team, that's about the best you can ask for.
I think so. I just like Yankee fans are really going through it. It's like it's not that serious. I think part of it is just that like
poor babies. Now they're only on pace to win 98 games.
Yeah, but I also think you know what it is? I think it's because the Mets are competent and the Mets are good and the Mets
the Mets are the best team in New York right now.
I think that's all it is. I think that's why they're freaking out. It's not that bad. The sky's not falling. It's just you're reminded that the other team is actually just really streaking. And look, I hate it. Like, friend of the pod, David Roth, the defector, Mets guy. Like we were talking in DMs, and I was like, hey, this competence is something that I don't particularly like. And also, he was like, well, they've got like 18 months of competence in them. Like they're an 18-month at a time competence. So this is not sustainable, unlikely. And I was like, yes, but at the same time, some people are saying, is it time for a raid of the Cohens? Some people are saying that's where we're at. I am not saying that, but maybe that is where we need to go. Maybe that is the time.
Are you saying that Steve Cohen has boxes of top secret, highly classified material from him?
Yes.
Okay.
Look, I'm not saying it. I'm just saying other people have been saying it, and it's worthy of at least checking into at the very least, because the Mets have to be stopped.
It's a good point, though, that the Mets being the team that they are right now is definitely increasing, I think, some of the agitation on Yankees fans' part of part of it is like we were beat us in the first half. We're on pace to 110 games. The team never looked better in our lifetimes, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we stink. And also the Mets are very good, and also the Blue Jays are pretty good right now too. But if the a mediocre second half, that's why that was the beauty of that first half. You gave yourself so much cushion in case exactly this stuff happened. Imagine how much worse it would all be if this leads down to 3 games as opposed to 10 or whatever happens to be the moment. That is that sheer benefit of having had that hot seat. Were the Yankees as good as the team, or are the Yankees as good? There has to be some level of regression there, but ultimately that doesn't matter to a certain degree because those wins they've already been banked. That's there. That's the real hot streak. It's not necessarily a season, but things go wrong. For the Frankie Montas doesn't get out of the gate, that's fine. Like, we have some time to figure stuff out or whatever. If Andrew Benintendi doesn't hit 100 right away, okay, so what? We still got some space to move. Look, check back in if 2 weeks later that lead is down to 5 games or something. We're really going to be having some fun. But if I'm a Yankees fan, I'm annoyed, but I don't necessarily know. Beyond, of course, the usual worry of any team in terms of, like, are we good enough to win a World Series? But I think ultimately that's the thing. The Yankees are still good enough to win a World Series. I don't think anything from the last 2 weeks no, unless something like Clay Holmes' struggles are more than just struggles, and it's like there's actually something wrong with him, and he's just not as good go forward. Because a guy like Holmes is just super, super important to what they do. But barring any injuries to guys like Judge, Cole, any other extremely young players, I think the Yankees will be fine, and I think they're still good enough to win the World Series.
Who's not good enough to win the World Series because they've been bad at everything for a while now. The Detroit Tigers, John, who finally relieved their long time 22-year run for Alex Avila in baseball ops. And say it again.
Alex Avila, is he also Alex Avila, like his son?
Oh, is he not? I just assumed it was Alex Avila. Okay, maybe not. Maybe I thought it was.
I just don't know if he's also Alex. I don't know if Al is short for Alex or if it's just.
That's what I assumed. Maybe I'm wrong. Everything just says Al, but no one's just named Al.
That's a good point. His name is Al, but that can't be his full name.
I just
Nobody's name
assumed it
is
was
Al.
Alex.
Must be. I wonder if it's Alex or Albert.
Maybe it's Albert.
Aluminum.
I probably shouldn't have assumed that, but I just walked in and
Albacore.
I assumed it was just Alex because Al and then his son Alex. I don't know, but it was also just a crazy just Chris Ilitch passing the buck
Oh
to
yeah, big
Al on
buck
the way
passing
out of
here.
just like that was our general manager who did that with JD Martinez and
Mm-hmm.
company and Justin
Yeah,
Verlander. And you're
that was
like,
the real thing.
but it's also just like I hope no one bought that. Like, no Tiger fan bought that. It's like that's not how any of this goes in any front office. Ownership is included in this process. Ownership has a voice. Ownership knows what's going on.
What Tigers fan is dumb enough to think that when the front office was talking about trading JD Martinez, that they didn't run it past ownership?
Yes.
That Chris is just sitting there in the corner with his fingers in his ears and his eyes closed, going la 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 la. I don't care what you guys do. La, la, la. Like, no, come on, dude. Oh,
Oh, there you are. You're back, John.
oh, did I dip out?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, it froze and you like dipped out for a second.
Oh, that's weird. Oh, well, no, I'm still here. But I was just saying, like, yeah, Chris Ilitch has to own up to some level of responsibility for this. I mean, I know Mike Ilitch died. Chris Ilitch was not the one who hired Al Avila. He was not the one who put Al Avila on the Tigers in the first place. But my man, you've been in charge of this team for several years now. This
It's
is
time to
not
sell the
just
team. Like we look at the learners. It's like I think if you're a Tigers fan, you're really, really pulling for the Ilitch family to sell. Like Chris
because
Ilitch does not want to be the owner, and he's not invested in this team
no,
whatsoever.
he doesn't like, and that's something I think that's worth noting for the teams that are in the hands of older gentlemen,
Mm-hmm.
where they do become a family enterprise, and there's no guarantee that your son or daughter or whatever child you want to give this team to knows what they're doing, has interest in what they're doing, cares about what they're doing, has any ability to do what they're like. If anything, if your team passes into a family trust at a certain point, you should be rooting very, very hard for them to sell that team.
Yep.
Because the good chunk of that family probably has no interest in in running a baseball team, or at least in spending the way that a championship baseball team would need to spend. We've seen it, I think, to a certain degree with the Steinbrenner family after George Steinbrenner died. We've seen it, I think, in the way the Rays, Cubs, or baseball is
I mean, the
not
Lakers with the Bus
priority.
family.
The Lakers with the Bus family. We're seeing it with the Tigers and the Ilitch family. I think we've seen it the way the very kind of unpleasant way things played out with the Broncos and the Bolin family. The way things played out.
Most of the time, it just doesn't go well. I think we have a pretty good track record.
Or
It
the
doesn't.
Saints with what's the
Benson.
name of the Benson family. Although they have their own very big problems beyond the NFL, beyond their NFL team.
I think the Ford family's gone okay thus far.
Or the McCoskeys in Chicago, who have they've driven the Bears into the ground over the last forever.
Does Jerry Reinsdorf have a son? What is that situation?
Yeah, if you're a White Sox fan, you better hope that Jerry Reinsdorf's family is not the one that's going to take over. Or the Angelos brothers in Baltimore.
Yes, that's another forgotten bad one. There was a lot of drama years ago.
Yeah, those situations create drama, they create tension, and they also create situations where not everyone is particularly interested or involved or invested in the team. And it seems clear that that's the case with Chris Ilitch because, truthfully, what was the excuse to keep Al Avila around as long as he's been there? You know, what is the excuse for letting Al Avila run both the draft and the trade deadline and then firing him 2 weeks later after the deadline? That's nonsense. That's so beyond. That's not just stupid. It's lazy.
Mm-hmm.
It reeks of ownership that's just checking in every now and again and doing things not with any particular plan in mind, but just the sense of like, all right, fine, we'll get someone new, I guess. I don't know. Like, this isn't as good as it should be or whatever. Like, Al Avila has been the general manager of this team since, I believe, the 2015 season, correct?
The 20 which one?
2015.
Yes, technically. Like, what is good? He's been in the organization, though.
He's been in the organization forever, but he's been the top decision maker for this franchise for the last 7 or so seasons.
That sounds right. Because Dombrowski was
And
before him, correct?
yes, Dombrowski was before him, and they let him go not long after the what was I going to say? Not long after the failed World Series team in 2013, and then
Yeah.
the end of the like the Mickey Verlander Prince Fielder run.
And they were
So
together in Florida, right? If I recall correctly. Didn't they have a
yes,
prior? Yeah.
the Tigers have had one winning season since 2015.
Oh,
One time. They have finished
oh,
last 3 times, and they're gonna finish last again this year. What at any point in there, like they, what is the argument? Where was the argument for keeping Avila? I can understand to a certain degree if, in particularly the last couple of years, with the way they were rebuilding stuff and the farm system they had, and the prospects coming in the form of Casey Mize and Matt Manning and Tariq Skubal and Spencer Torkelson and Riley Green and everyone else. And it's like, okay, let's give the prospects some time to get here. We have this cool wave of young talent coming, but not only has that wave of talent really badly not worked out, and I think it's too early to say, especially for Torkelson and Green, that that they're bust or anything. Young guys
not looking
struggle, rookies
good.
struggle. It's not looking good. The pitching has not looked good. Some of that is injury, but a fair amount of it just seems like Matt Manning throws 91 miles an hour with no good secondaries. How did that
Mhm.
happen? You know, like like Casey Mize when he was healthy did not look like a number one starter. He looked like a mid rotation guy at best. Like Alex, and it's worth noting too, like when that JD Martinez traded up, they got nothing for JD Martinez. Return for Justin Verlander has already basically disappeared. And Verlander's on his way to winning maybe another World Series and a Cy Young with Houston at
That
the age
man's a
of
machine.
38. Yeah, and granted, like Verlander's a freak, but the
Mhm.
Tigers got nothing for him. They got nothing for JD Martinez. They have just gotten so little in the trades that they have made. They have done so little in terms of player development, even beyond the headlining guys like Torkelson or Mize. When is the last time the Tigers brought up a young player who actually produced something for them?
The kid briefly who went to high school near me. What happened to
Akil
him?
Badu?
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, well, he was a Rule 5 pick, and he was great for a chunk of last year.
and then it
He
just
didn't
fell
make the
off a
team out
cliff.
of spring training. They, for whatever reason, just left him in AAA for a lot of the year. Brought him back up, I think, last month, and he has struggled and not really done anything. I mean, you look at the players on this current Tigers roster, age wise. Like Tucker Barnhart's 31, Jonathan Scope is 30. I guess Heimer Candelario has been no Heimer Candelario has an OPS plus of 77. Another guy who the Tigers acquired, who they figured from the Cubs, who figured, oh, this guy's going to be productive. He's got prospect pedigree. He really has not been anything more than a league average bat, And that the young guys they do have on this roster, Victor Reyes, Billy Castro, Badu, the brief bits of Daz Cameron that they got so far, Derek Hill, like
Cody Clemens.
oh god, the way that Michael Fulmer and Joe Jimenez have completely fallen apart. I guess Fulmer's not there anymore, but Alex Fado, another one of those young pitching prospects who has really not done anything. Like the incredibly poor free agent
And
decisions,
they were
both
just
with
going to
regards.
trade Scooble. Like that was just one of those two. They were like, well,
That's
what
one
if we
thing.
just
Like when you saw that, you had to feel like, what is the direction of this team? What
right?
is the goal here? Because if you're already looking to trade the one good young pitcher you have, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like what? This is what I don't get about the Tigers with Avila. There was no real evidence or sign, with the exception of an improving farm system that he very clearly did not seem to have much of a hand in. Because Avila does not strike me as a big time farm system guy. That's never really been his thing, I don't think. I mean, I know he's had the scouting background and everything, but he doesn't strike me as the kind of like Rays or Dodgers esque we're really advanced when it comes to player development. We're looking for diamonds in the rough. No, I don't get that sense. That's the thing with the Tigers. You don't really get that sense that they're on the cutting edge of anything. You,
Hmm.
you don't get that sense that they're at the vanguard of development, of performance, of player evaluation, of any of that stuff. They just feel very
But
kind
people like their farm. Like they're still in the top 10 in farm system rankings year to year. Like people just like the farm, and then it just gets up there and it just doesn't work. Like
but
it's
that's the
just
thing. Just to range on how top 100 years you have, or how many guys have a future value of. You need to be able to turn those guys into productive major leaguers. The Tigers just fail over and over again the last 7 seasons. And so, to me, I don't really get the appeal of Avila has been in years because the Tigers are just not. They don't do anything particularly well. Except they're really good at losing and they're really good at battens. Everything else is just for the last several years worked. And
Well, John, not everybody can be the Braves where you
it,
just call in it. You call up a Von Grisham, a Michael Harris, whoever. Like insert player here. Like it's just it doesn't work like that. Most teams you can't just plug and play all your farm depth and then them all just work. It's a unique thing. Privy
well, but that's
to
but
the
that's
good
the
team in
credit there.
Georgia.
The credit there's player development for taking these guys, developing them, and developing that you can comfortably call them barely any double A on that. And they immediately produce at the major league level. You know, test, but also to the Braves themselves. The Tigers haven't done that. They have failed continuously at doing that. And I think, again, the fact that Avila was let go after the deadline and after the draft suggests a real direction with the Tigers. There's no real plan. This is more just we got to do something. Somebody's got to get fired. Like, so why not the general manager? Especially because I mean, what attack does have to Avila? You know, what? And it goes to loop back around to where we started. What visible does Chris Ilitch have? You know, I'm not part of the decision making. That's the manager who did that. I'm not involved. Like, they did not spend, I think, the way a lot of fans expect, and then the media kind of expected them to spend. Certainly, Eduardo Rodriguez and Javi Baez, but it definitely, I think, felt to the both of us like that's not enough.
Right.
Baez has been a disaster. Rodriguez, for whatever reason, is currently, that he's currently away from the team, has not worked out at all.
Can you imagine if Carlos Correa had actually signed, like that breakfast or that brunch he had with Hinch actually led to him signing the contract? Like what kind of season? Like the amount of money he would have cost himself by going with Detroit over Minnesota next offseason. Like that is an all-time what if Correa gets talked into the Tigers.
I think like if you're a potential general manager for the Tigers and you see the owner of your team coming out and saying, when media is asking, well, what about this decision? And you're just throwing the and freaking it over him in the process. You don't want to work for a team that bad player development, creation decisions, and has an owner who seems checked out at best, if not antagonistic to you at worst. It makes it hard to feel like the future in Detroit, even with the good farm system, even with Torkelson and Green and whatever, even with the high draft pick they're going to have next summer and the high draft pick they had this summer. It does not make you feel good about what the future is there if the people in charge and the people signing the checks just don't care and don't have a plan. Because that is the vibe that's come out of Detroit. The decision makers there do not care and do not have a plan.
Go Tigers.
Go Tigers, man. I feel bad. Like I was excited. I really was excited about the Detroit Tigers this year. I really, they really did have that feel of like they were better at the second half last year. It looked like they were finally ready to start adding pieces. They had that wave of young talent coming, and they've blown it. They've just blown it completely.
We'll end on this, John. Teoscar Hernandez, right fielder for the Toronto Blue Jays, hitting pretty well. 128 WRC plus to this point, 351 plate appearances, 16 dingers. The Blue Jays are going to be in the playoffs. They're 10 games over 500. They're not going to catch the Yankees, but per Fangraphs, your website, very good website that people should go become a subscriber if they're not already. 94.5% chance of making the playoffs. Good piece, though, today on Fangraphs.com about his changing of plans by none other than Ben Clemens. What did you make of this piece, and why should people go check out what's been different about Teoscar Hernandez this year?
So yeah, it's interesting because it looks into Hernandez is someone who's his season has kind of been up and down a bit. I mean, Ben makes the point the first third of his season was terrible, and then he got better in the second third of the season. He's been red hot in the most recent third of the season, and tying that to his first pitch swing percentage and kind of how Hernandez's approach has changed. One of the things Ben mentioned is he has stopped swinging so much at the first pitch, which has helped him because. If you're a guy who has a predilection or a reputation for swinging at the first pitch, pitchers don't really have any good reason to give you a fastball. you're going to get breaking pitches. You're going to get off-speed pitches. Maybe you time it up right and you still get a hit, or you get a hanging breaker or a hanging off-speed pitch and you still do something. But it's a tough way to make a living if you're always up there hacking all the time. The other part that Ben knows is that Teoscar is not chasing as much. He's doing a lot more damage. He's keeping more of his swings kind of toward the heart and the shadow part of the zone, or he's swinging a fewer pitches in the heart and a fewer pitches in the shadow zone and fewer chase pitches overall. And while there is some downside in letting more pitches go by in the strike zone, there's also way more upside in not going after the pitches that you really can't do anything with. And I think that, whether or not you're interested in what Teoscar Hernandez has been like to date, I think this piece is a really good illustration of the value of being a selective hitter, because Teoscar Hernandez is the kind of athlete, he can hit mistake pitches easily. He can swing like crazy and still be a mostly valuable major league hitter. But when you add that selectivity, when you add that ability to lay off pitchers' pitches and essentially make pitchers come to you, make them throw you strikes, make them work you strike, and put yourself into advantageous count, 3-ball counts, 2-ball counts, not in 2-strike count, where you're not up there swinging all the time or hacking at pitches, it really can make a huge difference for you. And I think that that has been the case with Teoscar. It was like, he was, that was just part of the puzzle with him. But as he has matured and grown as a hitter, he has figured out a way to turn empty swings into something useful. And maybe it's not coming in terms of more walk or patience or whatever, but there is still value. And again, I would just recommend this to someone if you do understand essentially the value of pitch selectivity. And pitching. It's always that thing. Pitching and hitting it's a between two sides where each side has to make its relative adjustment. So if you want a good read on what an adjustment for a hitter looks like, check out Ben's piece on Teoscar. Ben is one of our he's always really good at illustrating this kind of on a level. So definitely go read that's something that interests you. And you can learn something about Teoscar Hernandez in the process.
And Eric Longerhagen, I've realized, is one of my favorite podcast voice.
Eric has a great voice. He is a voice that's just fan for podcast.
Right? Like I was listening on my walk today. I was listening to Fangraphs Audio with him and Jay Jaffe, and I forgot who else was on it. There's someone else on that particular one because it was a 3-parter. The guy from the Phillies was on part 1, which was really good. Chad. What was his name? Chad Durbin. What was his name?
About the former pitcher Chad Durbin.
Chad Durbin, that's correct. Okay. And then they were on, but I was listening to Eric, and I was like, "That is a podcast voice. I wish I had that voice. It's a strong John Benjamin vibe."
Eric does have a very good podcast voice. Also, definitely recommend folks. I read all of Fangraphs, but especially Eric is one of the best prospectors out there. And I really into stuff. Definitely check out Fangraphs Audio too if you want something that I know everyone knows effectively what, and the great work that Meg and Ben do. But Fangraphs Audio has a lot of cool interviews. They touch on a lot of very different subjects. So, I'll take the space to shout out Fangraphs Audio. If you've never checked that one out and you're interested in another 12 tones every now and again, Fangraphs Audio.
It's very good. It's a very good program, and I like the little gamer sound effects you got going on too. It's a good one. Nice. I like the little.
Dylan is the guy who produces that for us, and he does a great job.
He does. Jon Tayler, we can find you on Twitter at JA Tayler. Go subscribe to Fangraphs.com today if you have not already done so, and you have yourself a great rest of your week, my friend. And I will talk to you next week.
Later, bud.